Molly had been seriously engaged in rhythmic gymnastics, but 6 months ago, she suffered a serious spinal contusion during training, and after that, her athletic career was over. She was only 12 and had dreamed most of her life of becoming an Olympic champion. Of course, it was not only her own dream, but her coaches and mother did everything to make Molly dream about it. Since her youth, Molly's mother, Felicia, was a modeling star. She was beautiful, slim, elegant, and feminine. For the last 4 years, she was not at home due to constant travels, so Molly lived with her father, Paul. Paul was a caring and friendly man. He sincerely tried to create an ideal life for Molly and paid a lot of attention to her. Before the trauma, he'd even offered Molly to leave rhythmic gymnastics, noticing how hard it was for her. But the girl continued for her mother's sake. "You're going to be a real star," used to say her mother, and Molly was filled with pride. Unfortunately, now, she had no chance to become a star, and it seemed to the girl that life had lost its color, and in general, any meaning. After the trauma, she shut herself off from the outside world and everything going on in it. Some days, she could only lie on her bed staring at the ceiling. Sometimes she would cry silently so that her father would not hear. Every morning, her father came into her room to open the curtains, letting the sunlight flood her bed. Sometimes, Molly hated him for that. However, he did his best to cheer her up. He often took her out of town, to picnics, to the sea, invited friends who brought her wonderful gifts. But Molly was barely paying any attention to it. Nothing could please the girl, because all her time she was confined to a wheelchair, and now she had no way to fulfill her mother's hopes. Letting her mother down was the worst thing for Molly. Felicia spoke with her daughter only once after the trauma. She'd called late at night because of the time zone difference and expressed her sympathy and support rather dryly. She never called again, though Molly was expecting her to fly in to see her. Her mother didn't arrive. She didn't even answer Molly's call when she decided to talk to her before the next surgery. The operation was a success. A couple of months later, Molly began to take her first steps. The girl reached out to her mother. Felicia spoke briefly with her again, and Molly became sad after that call. One day, her father came home from work and said, "We've got dolphins in the city. They say it's useful for children." At the word children, Molly wrinkled her nose and turned to her father, showing her displeasure at being included in this category. Paul only smiled in response. "Adults like them too," he corrected himself, and Molly agreed to his suggestion. The rehabilitation center was very different from the delphinium she'd visited with her parents when she was 6. It was a comparatively small building with a round pool where dolphins frolicked. A pretty woman, a little younger than Paul, met them at the pool. She said hello to them. However, all Molly's attention was fixed on the dolphins. They seemed huge. Finally, Molly took her eyes off the pool and looked at the woman. The girl thought she was quite attractive, although she could not compare to her mother. At that moment, the woman approached Molly, smiling affectionately, and sat down next to the wheelchair so their faces were on the same level. Molly unhappily noticed that the woman had incredibly beautiful eyes, blue, clear, and deep, almost like the sea. "Hello, Molly. My name's Teresa. Nice to meet you." Molly did not answer anything, but Teresa was not offended at all. Continuing to smile, she sat down at the edge of the pool. Her palm touched the surface of the water, and a few moments later a dolphin's wet muzzle appeared. The dolphin opened its mouth and made a strange gurgling sound. "It's Atlas," said Teresa, stroking the dolphin's shiny skin. "He's the most sociable one we have." After a minute, the dolphin went sharply underwater, flapping its tail on the surface. Teresa and Molly were both splashed. The instructor looked at the girl worriedly, but she was not upset. She was mesmerized watching the dolphins who continued to frolic with the ball. Molly dared to swim in the pool only on the third time. Teresa was by her side, helped her to get used to the water, held her when the girl tried to touch a dolphin, stayed close when Molly, clinging to Atlas's fin, cleaved the water surface. Watching his daughter, Paul realized that for the first time in a long time, his daughter was happy. During those difficult months after the trauma, he'd experienced the full range of emotions, from despair to sadness, and now he felt relief. Sitting on the edge of the pool, Paul watched as Molly enjoyed the company of the most intelligent animals in the world and hoped that it would make her less unhappy. So weeks and then months went by. He and Molly came to the rehab center 3 times a week, but after a while, Paul would like to be here every day. "You could try it too," said Teresa to him once, when he leaned over to stroke a dolphin poking its nose into Molly's leg while she was sitting at the bottom of the pool. He caught a hint of slyness in her voice and looked at the woman carefully. She was a little more than 5 years younger than him, attractive, confident, quite determined, and incredibly lovely. Of course, even the very thought of having an affair with Teresa did not seem possible. Paul was still officially married to Felicia and still hoped that she would return one day, at least to her daughter, but that was unlikely. Felicia dreamed only of her career. After attending a rehabilitation center, Molly was able to walk more and more each time. After 6 months, the girl could walk using only a stick. She finally broke up with her board, crutches, and wheelchair. There was no need for such activities anymore, but Molly continued to visit the center anyway. One evening, while Molly was getting ready in the locker room, Paul stayed at the pool. He looked at Teresa, who had just climbed out of the pool. Her face, flushed, glistening with moisture, surrounded by a halo of disheveled hair, seemed to him the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Felicia, with her pale skin and empty, lifeless eyes, could never compare to the agile and bright Teresa, whose every feature radiated warmth, life, thirst for adventure. "Why dolphins?" asked Paul when she brought a bucket of fish to the pool. Teresa turned around and looked at him. "Probably because I've been dreaming about swimming with dolphins since childhood." Paul smiled. "Now you can swim with them every day." Teresa laughed too and remarked, "And absolutely free of charge." An awkward silence prevailed for a few moments, interrupted only by the splash of water as the dolphins showed themselves on the surface to catch a fish. "When I was a kid, I imagined myself as a mermaid," Teresa said. "It was incredibly silly." "We often do stupid things, especially when we're kids," answered Paul. Teresa turned to him and looked intently at him. "And what stupid thing have you done?" "I got married," wanted to answer Paul, but he refrained, and instead of this, he said, "I used a stick to beat the grass, imagining I was a Jedi." Life went on. Paul thought he was on a streak of good times. He and Molly both dreamed that someday they would be able to move into a house where they could have a dog, and one day Paul told Molly that their dream would soon come true. But Molly wasn't at all happy about it. The fact was that one day before, she'd noticed her father being nice to Teresa. So when she heard about the house, she called her father a traitor and a liar, and said that she would never move anywhere without her mother. The girl ran out of the apartment in anger and frustration. Rushing, trying to manage her stick, she bumped into her neighbor Helen, who had once been her mother's friend and had often babysat Molly while her mother and father were at work. Helen squinted and asked why Molly was so upset. The girl said she'd seen her father flirting with another woman and that she didn't want to go to a new house because she was afraid that woman would move there too. The neighbor wondered if they had so much money for the house, but the girl had no time to answer. Paul appeared and took Molly home. In the evening they reconciled and everything settled down. However, a little later, her father asked Molly not to tell anyone about the new house. The girl agreed and decided that there was nothing bad that she had blabbed to a neighbor. Soon she forgot about the quarrel with her father, but now she tried to find excuses not to go to the rehabilitation center. In fact, she wanted terribly to go back there, but she did not want her father seeing Teresa. Molly dreamed of saving her father for her mother's return, which she believed was going to happen. And indeed, Felicia arrived in early summer. She appeared on the doorstep of the small apartment in the middle of the day as Molly and Paul were getting ready to go out for a walk. When Felicia entered the apartment, a trail of expensive perfume lingered behind her. Molly looked at her with admiration, and Paul with surprise and a slight prick of regret. Today, he planned to meet Teresa in the park, who was supposed to be there as if by chance. He knew perfectly well that Molly had no warm feelings for her, but Teresa was trying her best to befriend her. "Hello, my dears, did you miss me?" asked Felicia. She had put her huge, expensive suitcase in the hallway, and it looked incongruous in this setting. Paul and Molly did not go for a walk that day. The girl was incredibly happy to see her mother. Felicia brought her beautiful things from France, an Italian bag and 2 bottles of perfume. However, Paul felt the tension between mother and daughter. It was too palpable, so palpable that even Molly had noticed it. In the evening, Paul and Felicia sat down in the kitchen. She looked at him intently. Paul, making tea, asked how long she'd come for. "Forever, I hope. You are my family. I'm tired of moving and working. Thought it was time to go back to my rightful place." Paul turned around and measured her with a surprised look. Felicia got up and started to wash the dishes, and Paul caught himself thinking that watching her was still as pleasant as before. When Molly was born, Felicia enjoyed the congratulations from people around and was glad to have such a pretty little girl. However, motherhood was a burden on her, and soon she took up her career. 4 years ago, she even went to France for work and has not been back since. Days passed by. Felicia tried in every way to please Molly and Paul. She cooked breakfast and lunch and often went out for walks with them. She always took Molly to school and picked her up. She went shopping with her daughter, and Paul had to put thoughts about Teresa away. After his wife had returned, he began to think that it would be great for Molly to have a normal, full family. Having sacrificed his own feelings and desires, he decided to try giving Felicia a chance. Teresa reacted calmly. She was not prone to illusions, and their relationship never went beyond mutual flirting. "That's good," she said when he dared to look up at her. "Molly needs her mother. Divorce ruins children's lives." Adjusting to the life in which Felicia appeared was much harder than he had anticipated. Over the years of separation, he'd managed to wean himself from her. However, Molly was over the moon at her mother's return. She tried to spend all her time near her, listening, talking, looking, trying to remember, like she might disappear again like a mirage or a vision. But her mother did not disappear. A few weeks passed and Molly began to realize that things were not as she was imagining. Her mother was only nice to her when her father was around. The rest of the time she spent on the phone with acquaintances. Sometimes Molly had to wait hours until she was done calling. One day, her mother forgot her in the mall. They were trying on blouses and Felicia, not finding anything interesting, left while Molly was finishing her fitting. It took the girl about half an hour to find her mother in the huge mall. In addition, Molly began to notice that her mother wasn't paying any attention to what she was telling her. She nodded absent-mindedly and spoke at random in response to all her questions. The girl was hurt by her mother's behavior, but she didn't want to talk to her father about it. Completely frustrated, Molly asked her father to pay for a few more sessions in the rehabilitation center. She wanted to see the dolphins. When she arrived, Teresa wasn't there yet. The girl stopped at the edge and reached out her hand to the dolphin as soon as it swam up to her. A few minutes later, she realized she was crying. Sobbing softly, Molly turned around to take her handkerchief out of her backpack to wipe her tears. Teresa was standing next to her, holding a handkerchief. She held it out to the girl, and suddenly Molly felt a rush of indignation. "It'll all work out. As hard as it is now, it'll get easier soon," Teresa told her, taking a seat next to her on the wooden bench. Molly sobbed and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "How do you know? Why do you even think you understand anything? I don't need your advice," Molly shouted angrily. "I'm sorry, Molly. I'm sorry I couldn't be friends with you. I'm sorry your life isn't what you want it to be." Molly felt her lips trembling treacherously. There were tears in Teresa's eyes too. "I don't need your pity," shouted Molly and rushed away. A week later, Paul came home from work too early and heard his wife arguing with someone in the bathroom. "Just a couple of months and it'll all be over. Of course I'll come back, but only after the divorce. Currently I won't get anything out of this tiny apartment. We'll have to wait until he buys a house. Don't be so worried. Paul is no match for you." She said something else, but Paul was already out of breath with anger and could not listen. He thought about rushing into the room and kicking Felicia out of the apartment now, but something made him stop. He returned to the hallway, stomped around, threw his bag on the shoe rack loudly, and called out to Felicia. The woman immediately came out of the bathroom, smiling cheerfully. A few days later, Paul announced that he was going to buy a new house. Both Felicia and Molly were happy, as if they'd never heard the news before. They all went to see different houses many times and tried to decide which one was right for them. In the end, they bought a 2-story cottage with a small garden that needed care and an abandoned swimming pool. Renovation work began. It took about 3 months to move into the new place. When they moved in, Paul suggested that Felicia register the apartment in Molly's name so she could live there when she became an adult. Felicia agreed, and a month later, she demanded a divorce. She said she'd fallen out of love with Paul and was going to build a relationship with another man for whom she had feelings after moving abroad. Molly was morally ready for her parents' divorce. One day, she heard her mother sweetly talking on the phone with a man. The girl was at court with her parents because they were supposed to determine who she should live with. Her mother did not want to take her, and the judge agreed that she should stay in her hometown with her father. After this, the division of property began. Molly didn't listen particularly hard, but she did pay attention when her mother jumped up from her seat, screaming hysterically. "What do you mean, no real estate? What about the house? What about the apartment?" Paul leaned back in his chair and watched his ex-wife's torment with pleasure. The apartment was given to Molly. The house was bought by his own aunt. Of course, she was surprised that Paul made such a request to her, but she did not refuse her favorite nephew. The car, which he used for personal purposes, belonged to the company where he was a part owner. From the courtroom, Felicia came out enraged like a fury. She turned around and told Paul that she hated him. In response, Paul only waved his hand. With the other hand, he clutched Molly's thin palm, who watched as her mother disappeared forever. They stood for a few more moments until the girl suddenly said, "Daddy, I want to swim with the dolphins, and you should try too." Paul looked at her in surprise, and the girl shrugged her shoulders. "I heard somewhere that adults like them too, especially if there's a good instructor around."